May 1880, Dronfield Parish Magazine. The 1880 general election. The church bell ringers, who have long been noted throughout the surrounding parish as a crack set, have ceased to act in consequence of the vicar refusing to allow them to ring on the occasion of the visit of the Liberal candidate, Admiral Egerton, and Mr. Barnes to Dronfield in the course of their election tour throughout the division on the first ultimate. The polling at Dronfield, which took place on the 6th, passed off quietly and with good order. The votes were taken at the grammar school and at the newsroom underneath the town hall. At the latter place a small crowd of people gathered soon after polling commenced, the number increasing as the day advanced until several hundred were collected, who amused themselves with good-humouredly cheering and booing at the parties of voters as they arrived, according to their approval or disapproval of their colour. A detachment of about 30 policemen patrolled the streets, but their services were not required. Nothing more serious occurred throughout the day than a few rotten eggs exchanging ownership. It was evident, to the greatest stranger to the town, that yellow was the popular colour, both by the display of bunting of that tint and by booing with which voters voted on the blue side were received. The latter came in for the greater share of egg pelting, and one gentleman had the misfortune to receive one in the immediate vicinity of his mouth, whilst another, who, in answer to the salute of the crowd, stood waving his hat in that doorway of the polling booth, and he had one of those highly perfumed missiles thrown into it, to the great delight of the crowd around. The committee on both sides provided an ample supply of conveyances, but by way of variety one gentleman allowed himself to be brought to the poll on a wheelbarrow drawn by 6 bipeds decorated with a profusion of yellow paper, and followed by a crowd of juveniles cheering to the echo. The result of the voting was made known the following day at Chesterfield, the figures being Barnes L. 8,110, Egerton L. 3,063, Arkwright C. 2,517, and Turbot C. 2,308. The Sheffield and Rotherham Independent, 21st of January, 1896. Headline: Exciting Adventure in Bradway Tunnel. Yesterday, Mr. Joseph Fisher, butcher of Dronfield, got into the train leaving Dronfield at 12 o'clock for Sheffield, entering a third-class compartment, there being only one other passenger in the compartment. Immediately after the train started, Mr. Fisher noticed that his fellow passenger appeared very restless and excited, and began to froth at the mouth. When the train had got so far as Messrs. Lucas Shovel Works, the stranger got up suddenly, opened the carriage door, and would have got out had not Mr. Fisher restrained him. He suddenly turned on Mr. Fisher, and snatching his stick from him, aimed a blow at him which missed. Mr. Fisher, thinking the man was deranged, and not liking him for a solitary companion through the tunnel, put his head out of the window and called out to the guard to stop, and thereby alarmed not only the guard but the passengers in adjacent carriages. As the train showed no signs of stopping, and there was no lamp in the carriage, and they were approaching the Bradway Tunnel, and the stranger was becoming increasingly violent, Mr. Fisher, fearing he might be armed with a knife, suddenly seized him, and throwing him to the ground, grasping him by both his wrists, knelt on him, and thus held him down all the way through the tunnel until Door Station was reached. Here he handed him over to the station authorities. Mr. Fisher changed for more congenial company. The man, who had his head bound up as if wounded, said he came from Wadsley.
The removal of the steelworks. At a meeting of the shareholders of Messrs. Chas, Camel and Co. Sheffield held on the 29th ult, it was resolved to purchase from Messrs. Wilson, Camel and Co. their works in Dronfield, and also the Derwent hematite from works recently secured by that firm at Workington, Cumberland, and to remove the Dronfield plant to Workington, the amount of the purchase money being £350,000. it was shown that the step was rendered necessary in consequence of the immense cost of the carriage of the metal and rails to and from the coast, and the increasing competition in the steel rail trade, no less than £120,000 being paid annually to the Midland Railway Company by Messrs Wilson, Camel and Co., considerably more than half of which will be saved by the removal. The announcement, although not a startling surprise, rumour having already given rise to a fear of such an event, was received in the town with great regret and gloomy anticipations as to the future. Considerable sums have been borrowed by the town for the carrying out of the public improvements rendered necessary by the great increase in the population caused by the establishment of the works in Dronfield, the bulk of which has yet to be paid, but the most severe loss will necessarily fall on the owners of property, many of whom are working men whose hard-earned savings invested in house property will be rendered comparatively unremunerative. Hopes are entertained that the site may be taken for other works, but at present there is no foundation for expecting their immediate realisation.
March 1913, Dronfield Parish Magazine. Dronfield Knows. Increased sobriety. Extracts from the Petty Sessional Division of Eckington Superintendent's Report. During the past year, there has been a decrease of 51 convictions for drunkenness as compared with the average number during the 4 preceding years, and a decrease of 29 as compared with last year's convictions. 2 convictions have been recorded against licence holder during the year, as against 6 during the preceding year. No convictions against beer houses have been recorded since last report. There is 1 licensed house to every 254 of the population. It is evident that temperance principles are gaining ground, and the whole report is pleasant reading, except that part which deals with the number of inns for the population. Surely we do not need 1 inn for every 254 people, but this is a state of affairs which is steadily being improved. Note: in the vicinity of Dronfield High Street were the following inns and beer houses: the Bluebell, bottom of High Street; the Blue Stroups, High Street; the Ivy, High Street; the Mason's Arms, High Street; the Mason's Arms, formerly the King's Head, Farwater Lane; the Victoria, Stubley Lane; the Green Dragon, Church Street.
29th of July, 1854, Sheffield and Rotherham Independent. On Monday, Pablo Fanck made his public entry into Dronfield. The circus was erected in a field belonging to Mr. Nicholson, surgeon. There were 2 performances, one at 2 p.m, the other at 8 in the evening. The afternoon performance was but thinly attended. The Sunday school scholars belonging to the established church were admitted, through the kindness of Reverend Mr. Birtles and others. The evening performance was crowded. It is said above 1,200 were present, and Pablo was highly gratified at the patronage accorded to his establishment. 18th November 1862, Sheffield and Rotherham Independent. Accident at Dronfield. On Saturday evening, an accident happened to the conveyance of Mr. Slack of Chesterfield, carrier between Sheffield, Dronfield and Chesterfield. The circus company of Messrs. Sanger had been performing at Dronfield on Saturday, and in the evening, about 9 o'clock, after the elephant had done its performances, it was being led by its keeper from the circus to the stables. Mr. Slack's waggon, with 2 horses, were in the road, and Mr. Slack was engaged in delivering a parcel, his girl being in charge of the horses. On the elephant coming up, the horses took fright. The leading horse broke loose, and the shaft horse broke both shafts and did considerable damage. The first horse had galloped nearly to Colaston before it was caught. 13th of April, 1867, Sheffield and Rotherham Independent. Messrs. Pinder's Circus at Dronfield. The proprietors of this circus visited Dronfield on Thursday and gave an evening performance. The novelty of the attraction brought together nearly the whole of the inhabitants, not less than 1,500 or 1,600 of whom, it was computed, patronised the circus. The performances were much enjoyed. The entertainment concluded with the impersonation of Mazeppa.
1854, Dronfield. During the present week, the old-fashioned town of Dronfield has resolved upon shaking off some of its antiquity. and in keeping pace in some measure with the world outside, which nowadays even rejoices in exhibiting something new. Sydenham witnesses its Crystal Palace, and now Dronfield exhibits a no less remarkable erection, taking into consideration its hitherto stationary propensity. On Wednesday and Thursday next, the inhabitants will have the pleasure of inaugurating a memorial of one of the most remarkable statesmen that England ever produced, and whose name, in connection with one of the most memorial events in political history, viz., the repeal of the Corn Laws, will descend the remotest posterity, will mean Sir R. Peel, a public pump, has long been wanting the town, and a few spirited individuals therein undertook to raise the funds requisite to carry this public want into effect. Subscriptions were solicited, and the want was met in liberal spirit, a handsome fund being placed at the disposal of the committee for the purpose. The gentlemen engaged in carrying out the useful structure were J. Lucas Esquire, President; J. Nicholson Esquire, Treasurer; Messrs. G. R. Lucas, Cockerton, Earnshaw, T. Jenkinson, and Grattan, Committee. It was determined to combine the ornamental with the useful, and plans were submitted, which ended in the selection of one which cannot fail to be the most satisfactory to every subscriber to the fund, and which will be a great ornament for the town. In consideration of the eminent services for Sir Robert Peel, and the great benefits of his important measures are found to confer upon the country at large, it was resolved to dedicate the neat and beautiful Market Cross to his memory in recognition for his merits of a statesman of whom England may feel justly proud. The erection consists of a cross built of finely worked stone, having 4 sides highly ornamented with elaborately finished facings and ornaments. The pyramidal cone is surmounted by a beautiful wrought cross, the whole presenting a highly imposing appearance, being an excellent specimen of stone cutting and reflecting the great both upon designer, Mr. Flockton of Sheffield, and the executor of the work, Mr. J. Cam of Greenhill. The height of the structure is about 23 feet, and the word Peel is conspicuously carved in bold relief in the stonework. The cost has been about £52. The pump attached to the erection is a commodious one, and cannot fail to be a great service to the town, where it was much wanted.
Fraudulent exhibiting. A case of some interest to exhibitors at horticultural shows was heard at the Chesterfield County Court yesterday. William Wrigley, an exhibitor at the last show of the Dronfield Agricultural and Horticultural Society and a member of the committee of the society, sought to recover from the society the sum of £2 and 3 shillings, being the amount of prize money awarded him at the show on September the 3rd for his exhibits. Mr. Charles Padley, Messrs. Lucas and Padley, Sheffield, appeared for the society, and the plaintiff conducted his own case. Mr. Padley said the society did not dispute the amount in question, but the committee contended that the plaintiff's conduct disqualified him from recovering the prizes. The plaintiff, in the course of this cross-examination, said the asters, apples and marigolds, in respect of which the claim was made, were his own growing. His Honour read the rules, which stipulated that the exhibits must be grown by the exhibitor. Mr. Padley said the plaintiff was a member of the committee when the rule was drawn up, but he exhibited fruit and flowers which on his own admission before the whole committee he had grown. His conduct called for the severest treatment as the committee felt bound to prevent fraud. George Pearson, Dronfield's secretary of the society, said he was present at a meeting of the committee after the show when plaintiff, who was present, was taxed with showing goods other than his own growing. The plaintiff acknowledged that some of the asters were not his own growing. The apples, he said, had not been sent for competition. 2 of the 6 marigolds, he admitted, were not of his own growing. His Honour said without any rules at all, if they went down to the bedrock of a common honesty, it was plain that the intention was that the exhibit should be grown by the exhibitor. Otherwise, they would have persons with no garden at all going round buying up specimens and sweeping all before them. The plaintiff said that he had been cheated. His Honour, it would be nearer the truth to say you have tried to cheat. A verdict for the defendant society was given.
At 11 a.m. yesterday, an accident happened at the top of High Street, Dronfield, to a gentleman and 2 ladies driving in a trap from Baslow. As the party were taking the turn to go down High Street, a number of boys were making a great noise and blowing tin whistles, at which the horse took fright and ran away. It got one of its legs over the shafts, and on attempting to turn from the street into a yard came down and threw the trap over, the occupants being thrown with great violence onto the road. One of the ladies sustained a bad bruise on the knee, and the other was seriously injured on the head. The gentleman and horse escaped unhurt. The injured persons were attended by Dr. Fletcher. The trap was completely smashed.
The Sheffield and Rotherham Independent newspaper. Wednesday, January the 1st, 1890. Headline: Strike at Gosforth Colliery, Dronfield. On the 15th of November, a largely attended meeting of the miners working at Gosforth Colliery, the property of Mr. John Sheard, took place at the Masons' Arms, Dronfield, for the purpose of receiving the report of the deputation which had waited on Mr. Sheard with regard to the price list. The miners said they were not paid for filling and trimming dirt to long distances. Mr. Sheard argued that his men were better paid than any other colliery in the district, and that the price he paid for getting coal covered all. The matter was laid before the miners' union. The men gave the necessary notice and brought out their tools on Saturday. Mr. Sheard is willing to give the 10% rise, but will not listen to the extra payment for filling, trimming, etc. As the matter now stands, work will not be returned till a settlement has been made with regard to the price list.
A love affair at Dronfield, keeping open during prohibited hours. Sheffield and Rotherham Independent newspaper, 18th of July, 1876. Mary Ann Wilson, landlady at the King's Arms, Farwater Lane, Dronfield, was summoned for having her house open for the sale of intoxicating liquor after 11 o'clock at night, and John Pearson, Dronfield, was summoned for being in the house at the time. The defence was that Pearson had gone to the house to see the daughter, whom he was courting. The bench, believing that statement, dismissed the case.
A child bitten by a mad cat at Dronfield. Sheffield and Rotherham Independent newspaper. On Saturday, a child named Harvey Robinson was bitten through the hand by a cat supposed to be rabid, and made a fierce attack upon him. The child was rescued by a neighbour, who was attracted by the little fellow's cries. The cat was shortly afterwards destroyed by a man named John Naylor, and the child has since been attended by Dr. Roove.
Offence against the Licensing Act. Sheffield and Rotherham Independent newspapers, 21st of August, 1883. Stephen French of Dronfield, Hilltop, and Thomas Charlesworth of Farwater Lane, Dronfield, were summoned for being on the licensed premises of the Creature's Arms at Hilltop. On the night of the 7th inst, and to William Arundel, the person in charge of the house, and to whom the justices on the 6th inst had refused to transfer the licence, was charged with selling intoxicating liquors without a licence on the night of the 7th inst. The justices dismissed the charge against Arundel and fined the other defendants 19 and sixpence, including costs.
Drinking poison tea at Dronfield. Sheffield and Rotherham Independent. January 6th, 1879. On Saturday, Mrs. Mary Wilson, her daughter, and Solomon Robinson, Mrs. Wilson's brother, were taken suddenly ill after drinking some tea. Dr. Ruth was sent for, and on examining the contents of the teapot, found it to contain not only tea, but a mixture of tea and tobacco. Dr. Ruth administered medicine to counteract the poison, and the parties are now recovering. How the tobacco became mixed up with the tea is not known. Sheffield and Rotherham Independent, 6th of May, 1873. Accident at Dronfield Station. Last evening, an accident of a serious nature occurred at Dronfield Station. On arrival of the 8:35 p.m. train from Sheffield, a man named George Jepson, a labourer living in Ivy Cottage Yard, Dronfield, in attempting to alight while the train was in motion, slipped and fell between the carriages and the platform. Directly after he'd fallen, the train stopped, and on being rescued from his perilous position, he complained that his left arm was broken. He was able to walk to Dr. Ruth's surgery, but on examination, it was found that his arm had been so severely crushed that it was considered advisable to amputate the limb. Notes: Ivy Cottage Yard was also known as Outram's Yard. Dr. Samuel Ruth was living in Church Street at the time of this accident.
Sheffield Daily Telegraph, May 1883. Anyone can be a property owner in Drumfield on a large scale for very little money. 40 cottages there are said to be on the market awaiting a purchaser at £7 each. Having built a row of 44 houses for company workers in the 1870s at a cost of £4,840, Wilson Camel eventually sold them in 1887 for £341. One consolation was that local people had access to cheap housing, but shopkeepers and tradesmen fared badly. The number of shops and home-based traders fell by a quarter. Over 200 children left the town, leading to the closure of one of Drumfield's 3 schools, the National School, in 1883. At the start of 1883, the rateable value of Drumfield was £18,000. Within 3 years, this had fallen to £7,000. However, the cost of running the town did not decrease. The town was still paying off loans incurred when Wilson Camel arrived in the town, required to improve sewage and water services, roads and larger schools. It took almost a generation for Drumfield to recover the debt.
22nd of May, 1847, Sheffield and Rotherham Independent. Distressing and fatal accident at Drumfield. On Thursday evening week, a youth aged 10 years named William Hogworth, son of the Reverend Mr. Hogworth of Drumfield, was unfortunately drowned in a well at that place under the following melancholy circumstances. It appears that he was playing with the children of Mr. Samuel Lucas, his uncle, when he got over a wall near the grammar school, where there was a well which was undergoing repairs, and the workmen, on leaving it for the night, covered it with a door for safety. It is supposed that the unfortunate boy was trying to conceal himself from his playfellows, lifted up the door to get under it for that purpose, when he fell into the well and was drowned. His friends, after unsuccessfully searching for him, in the morning on the door being removed from the well, his cap was perceived floating on the water, and his body was found shortly afterwards. There was a severe fracture on his left temple, which had doubtless been done by the fall.
Sheffield and Rotherham Independent, 22nd of September, 1881. A novel defence at Drumfield. Yesterday, Mary Jepson, wife of George Jepson, Soper Lane, Drumfield, was apprehended on a charge of stealing half a dozen pairs of bump sheets belonging to Mr. A. Machin, draper, Soper Lane. The goods were missed from the shop door on Monday evening, and suspicion fell upon the accused, who had been seen loitering outside the premises. Yesterday, police constables Meakin and Nadin searched Jepson's house. One found of the missing sheets in use on the children's bed, and the others in a box. The prisoner denied the robbery and in defence said she went out on Monday evening, leaving the house door unfastened, and on her return found the bundles of sheets on a chair near the door. She was taken into custody and will be examined at Eckington today and remanded until Monday. Notes: Soper Lane is Soper Lane. A bump sheet is a loosely woven fleeced cotton fabric sheet.